As ranchers, we understand the cow-calf side of the business, but what about the next step in the beef chain, the grow yards and the feed yards? Trista Brown Priest joins me from Cattle Empire in Satanta, Kansas, with a look into the feed yard business. What's it look like? What's their struggles? Why is she optimistic? And the answer to this question.
If we could advise ranchers on how to most successfully send their cattle to the feed yard.
On this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. It's another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show, and I'm your host, Justin Mills. We thank you for joining us here again on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM, where you'll find us right here every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern, and we are glad you're joining us here this weekend as well. Well, on our show today, we're going to be looking at a little bit more in depth at the feed yard business as Trista Brown Priest with Cattle Empire in Satanta, Kansas, joining us, as I said in the opening there. I'm excited to visit with her mainly I think for a lot of us that are more on the ranching side of the business, we understand the concept of a grow yard or a feed yard, but some of the maybe inner details we don't know quite as much about, and that was kind of the focus behind some of this. And also just to hear from her, from being and you'll hear one of my questions with Trista about the perception of them kind of being the middleman between us as ranchers and the packers. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that, as well as just things that they get to deal with as well. And one of those has to do with succession planning. And I appreciate Trista's very honest comments about succession planning. We deal with it in the ranching business. Really, any business in the world probably deals with succession planning, and no doubt was a very big influence in what you see with the Cattle Empire company as you see it today. But we're going to talk more about that with Trista, and excited to have that conversation with her. Also, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be by with his edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll also have another edition of our breed spotlight today as we focus on the Limousin and the Limflex breed. Mark Anderson, Executive Director of the American Limousin Foundation, will be here to join us for that breed spotlight coming up in our next segment. Well, how would you like to win a Cross 5 cattle cooler? It's worth about $350, and here's how you can do it. Right now, registration is open for the inaugural Working Ranch Expo that's going to be held this coming December 8th, 9th, and 10th in Las Vegas during the National Finals Rodeo. So to kick off the opening of the registration for this new event, if you register by the 15th of September, then you're going to be entered into a drawing for a Cross 5 cattle cooler. Now, registration is only $15, and it's good for all 3 days. Kids under 17 are free. College students get in for $10. Registration includes access to over about a dozen educational sessions that will be presented during the event. So if you'd like to learn more about it and would like to register, here's how you can do it. Go to workingranchexpo.com. And by the way, as I said, get registered before the 15th of September for a chance to win that cooler. Well, the next edition of Working Ranch Magazine is headed your way, and the Captain Tim O'Byrne, publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine, gives us another preview of what you're going to find in this next issue on this week's Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. I want to bring your attention to the September-October issue, page 70. This is an article by Heather Smith-Thomas. She's a great writer. Knows a lot about cows. Treatment tips to remember, all right? And she talks about all kinds of things, adequate restraint and cleanliness, proper treatment, proper diagnosis, follow the directions, and record keeping and follow-up monitoring. It's all in there. Page 70, September-October issue of the Working Ranch Magazine. Back to you, Justin. I know you got a great show for us. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Well, thanks, Captain, and I'm looking forward to my copy coming. You know, I thought about this a little bit. You'd think I'd get a copy before everyone else does, but that's not the case. I have to wait just like you all do. So, again, be looking for your next issue of Working Ranch Magazine. Right now, a thank you to our sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, the American Simmental Association with the Carcass Merit Program, feed conversion data, calving ease research, and it's established the Simmental as a beef industry leader, combining growth and carcass value with outstanding cow traits, research that's backed by the most extensively documented genetics and largest multi-breed database in the industry, SimGenetics. Profit through science. Find out more at simmental.org. Biozyme, protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Gelbvieh Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelbvieh.org. Hargrove Ranch Insurance, providing pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers across the nation. Contact Hargrove Ranch Insurance at 325-573-8975 for a free custom quote, or find them online at hargroveinsurance.com. Well, stay with us. Our Breed Spotlight is next as Mark Anderson with the North American Limousine Foundation joins me to talk about some exciting news about Limousine cattle coming out regarding carcass EPDs. Then later, Trista Brown Priest with Cattle Empire joins me for our featured interview on the feed yard business. So don't go away. You're listening to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Starting off in the right direction is essential to gaining an advantage later when you go to market your calves. And I have proof that the right direction is with Sim Angus sired calves. A 2020 study by K-State showed that Sim Angus sired steer calves earn more at sale time than all other breed identified sire groups with at least 50 lots represented on Superior Livestock's 2020 summer sales. The proof's right there. For low-risk, high-potential calves with earning potential, be confident that SimGenetics will give you more per head, period. Stand strong, Simmental. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and I'm joined now by Mark Anderson, who's the Executive Director for the North American Limousine Foundation. And Mark, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Oh, thanks for having us, Justin. We appreciate it.
I want you to tell us a little bit about the Limousine cattle. They've been around in the country a while, but in the last 5 years, you feel there's been some really advancements and some changes made to the Limousine cattle. And so I wanted you to kind of give us a little bit more detail about what that looks like.
Thanks. Yeah, our breeders have really done a nice job here the last 5 years, and I think they're paying attention to the market signals we're getting now. As you know, most of these feeder cattle going into the system and cattle coming out of these feed yards, there's been a big, strong demand signal for trying to achieve the upper two-thirds of choice. And, of course, we're getting more prime cattle now, but it's improved beef demand with the quality improvements for eating consistency. But at any rate, our breeders have done a nice job. These probably aren't the Limousine cattle you're used to looking at 15, 20 years ago. We have the Limflex hybrid, which is Limousine Angus cross, and then, of course, our purebred bulls primarily in the mix. 85% of our herd book is now registered black. Which works well into a terminal cross as we're trying to make cattle that fit into the feeder cattle and feed yard system in the U.S. But our breeders have done a nice job. They've increased their marbling. They're very good on a terminal cross, of course, with a straight Angus set of commercial cows or red Angus. But the advantage and the pluses that they've always had in ribeye and somewhat in feed efficiency are still there. They've deepened and softened the cattle up, but they've improved their marbling EPD now in a good 2-3 tenths to what they were just 5 years ago, as they've tried to kind of catch up and making some bulls that kind of fit the industry needs now that work well in a terminal cross and still provide good females with, maintaining their maternal traits as well. But we fed a lot of the cattle. I used to feed a lot of cattle and fed a lot of the Limflex hybrid, but got along very well at the packing house with a lot of those cattle hitting the, upper two-thirds of choice and, maintaining the ribeye. And that cross works well because we're feeding cattle a lot bigger than we were 5-10 years ago. So we're trying to maintain our advantages in feed efficiency with that cross and getting cattle to bigger outweights. So our breeders have done a nice job trying to match up the cattle and make mating decisions.
I want you to go a little bit more there into some detail here on the carcass EPDs, because there's some new data out there where you've got quite a bit more information out there about the carcass EPDs on Limousine cattle, and it's something you guys are really excited about.
Yep, we are. It's been about a year and really 2 years getting it in place, but we've got some pretty data-minded breeders and quite a few that are still cattle feeders, but we've been able to capture to date over 88,000 carcass phenotype records directly out of the packing house that we can tie back to pedigrees. And what it's done, it's just added to accuracies, particularly on different sires as far as carcass weight, yield grade, quality grade. And as we move forward, that's going to grow rapidly over time, and we're fortunate enough to have membership that are not only seed stock breeders but cattle feeders to capture that data as well. But it's increased accuracy on our EPDs by a good 2-3 on the affected sires and those pedigree lines, and it's helped our breeders kind of chase cattle quicker to get those superior carcass traits. I would say by the first quarter or the end of it next year, we'll have more carcass kill data and phenotype records in than any other breed association in the United States. But all that's helped through IGS. Without them, we couldn't do it. Combining the genomics with the pedigree and performance data up there, and they produce a fabulous run that's crossbreed comparable on over 22 million head of cattle in their cattle evaluation now. So it's been a big jump forward for us and accelerated genetic improvement in both the Limousin and Limplex classifications on our cattle. And our breeders are utilizing it very heavily, Justin.
I want you to go back and touch back on the cow side of things and what that cow brings to a guy's herd if he's going to go with a Limousin. I know you talked a little bit about the Limousine cattle being a great terminal cross, but there's also some advantages coming in from a maternal side as well.
There is, and it all relates to stayability. And I think, we look at where we stand in cavities, birth weights as we crossbreed compare EPDs. There's some really good cattle out there as far as the Limplex female goes in the industry that our breeders are making now. We've got folks that look at a balanced set of EPDs when they're going through, and I know that most of them have picked up on the genomic enhancement of cattle here, particularly the last 5 years, just getting an early peek into that animal's life. So as we got to be careful as we make these bigger cattle for feed yards to bigger slaughter weights, we still need to maintain a moderate sized cow that we don't break somebody, particularly with all the drought conditions we've got, that they can afford to feed that cow. And you look at where we're at on milk, birth weight, and cavities. I mean, you can find yourself a pretty functional set of moderate cows that'll breed back if you don't, you kind of find middle ground there and don't get too carried away with some of it.
Mm-hmm. And if folks are interested in finding out more about the Limousine cattle, what is the best way to do that?
Probably go to our website at the North American Limousine Foundation, and that's just www.nalf.org, or you can email or call me. My email is mark, M-A-R-K, at nalf.org.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
No, we appreciate you having us, Justin, anytime.
And again, that's Mark Anderson, Executive Director for the North American Limousine Foundation. And as he referred to his website, nalf.org, that is NALF.org is the website for more information on Limousin or Limplex cattle. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, Trista Brown Priest joins us with Cattle Empire in Satanta, Kansas, as we talk the feed yard business. We're going to be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It's weaning time, one of the biggest days of the year for you and the most stressful for your calves. Ensure a smooth transition with VitaCharge Weaning Program. This two-step program with Amafirm Advantage gives calves the nutritional boost they need to get through the first weeks of weaning, accelerate appetite, increase weight gain, and improve health. It's weaning time. Get them ready with VitaCharge. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills. Our featured segment today brought to you by Biozyme. Protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. charge. Well, before we get into our featured subject today on feed yards, I thought it would be interesting to look over some statistics from the USDA. According to their numbers, there are about 28,180 feed yard operations in the country, of which 80% of those are family owned. Now, of those 28,180, there's only about 1,400 feedlots that have a greater than 1,000 head capacity, and those smaller feedlots really only account for a very small market as far as those fed cattle that are marketed. Now, in contrast, feedlots that are 32,000 head capacity or more, well, they account for about 40% of the fed cattle marketed here in the country. So some interesting statistics about the feed yard business. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce to you Miss Trista Brown Priest, who is the Chief Operations Officer for Cattle Empire in Satanta, Kansas. And Trista, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Trista, before we get into some of the other questions that I want to talk about as we I just want to give folks today, the overall purpose of this interview is to give folks listening just what it looks like in the life of a feedlot operation. And so before we get to that, though, I thought it was important to give us a brief history of your family's operation there in Santana, Kansas.
Absolutely. So, like you said, my name's Trista Brown Priest, and I'm the third generation of Brown family here at Cattle Empire. The company was started by my grandpa in 1978. He before that was a wheat farmer, and cattle were a natural hedge for wheat at that time. You know, the markets don't really work that way necessarily anymore, but at that time, cattle were a good offset. And so he got into the cattle business and grew from there. My dad joined the business in 1995 and is still our CEO. And then I've been here, I guess, since 2008. So, we overlapped there for quite a while, and all got to work together. So throughout that time, we have varied in size a little bit. We started out, when Grandpa bought the company, we were a 4,000 head feed yard. We grew quite a bit, substantially, from the 70s and early 80s into the mid, 20-teens, growing from that 4,000 head feed yard into a 250,000 head feed yard. At that time, in 2017, we were the fifth largest feed yard in the country. Still family owned and operated. So the ownership group at that time was my grandparents, my dad, and his siblings. He has 4 siblings. And both my grandparents passed in 17 and 18. And when we thought we had succession plan all figured out, and that it would be a pretty seamless transition from their ownership group to my dad and just his siblings. But when it came time to put the cards down, that wasn't what ended up happening. A lot of my aunts and uncles, or all of them, in fact, wanted out of the company. So in 2018, we liquidated 3/4 of our business to be able to buy them out. So we went from 250,000 head capacity to 50,000, which would be, 25% of, which was my dad's quarter. And now the business is owned by my parents and my sister and I.
Trista, you talked a little bit about succession planning there just a moment ago, and I don't want to let that go. We're going to go back to that in a moment. But before we do that, as we get a little bit more information about Empire, what class of cattle, what type of cattle are you guys feeding out there in your yard?
So we're 50,000 head capacity, mostly custom feeders here in Southwest Kansas. So the vast majority of the cattle that we care for at Cattle Empire are owned by customers. We bring them in anywhere from 500 to 800 pounds and feed them out until they're ready to go to the packer. We feed conventional cattle that receive implants and Optiflex, and then we also feed natural and NHDC, non-hormone treated cattle here as well.
What's the amount of labor, the scope of labor that you rely on for your operation?
So we have about 50 employees. They're all beef quality assurance certified. So everybody on the first day of work learns how to handle animals, even if that's not their role. We have a couple office employees, and they are BQA certified, even though they will almost never be out in the pens with animals.
Trista, I'd like for you to kind of now break the feed yard out and into kind of the departments or the enterprises within each area that you guys focus on? I know for some folks listening, you're probably very familiar with this, but I think there are also folks that maybe haven't ever been inside the full working details of a large feed yard. And so I think it'd be helpful if you kind of outlined really the departments within a feed yard operation like yours.
So feed yards are made of 3 different departments: the feed department, the maintenance department, and the cattle department. The feed department, manufactures the feed. We make all of our own feed here on site. We steam flake the corn, and then the vast majority of our other ingredients would be dried distillers grains, silage, and flaked corn. So we do a little bit of ground hay in our starter ration. So we make all that feed. So the feed department makes and distributes the feed to the cattle. Mm-hmm. The cattle department are our cowboys and the processors. So the processors, do the initial receiving of cattle into the yard, and then any re-implants or anything like that. And then the cowboys ride pins every day, usually the same pin. So those cowboys get to know those cattle. They pull any sick animals, and those sick animals go to the hospital, where we have a TN visa employee who is actually a licensed vet in Mexico, is our head doctor, and he will temp the animal, and if they have a temperature, he'll follow the protocol laid out by our consulting veterinarian in how to treat that animal. The animal will stay in the hospital until it's better, and then it goes back to its home pen. Mm-hmm. And then the maintenance department just keeps all of that running. So that would be, loaders, feed trucks, four-wheelers, all the things. And then they also do all the pen floor maintenance with removing manure and keeping all the pens clean and putting out bedding and things like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we do have a consulting veterinarian and nutritionist that come twice a month to make sure that our employees are well trained, and that we're making, if we haven't needed to make any changes to the rations or to our veterinary protocols, they help us analyze the data to make sure that we're doing everything to the best of our abilities.
Mm-hmm. Trista, right now, if we were to start and go through maybe a 12-month period of time, what would that look like, your busy times of the year and the things that you kind of get ramped up for, and the things when it's slowed down? So what does it look like in the course of a 12-month period for a feedlot?
So at a feed yard, the pace of work, I guess, would be a lot more steady than what y'all do. We don't have nearly the seasonalities. We obviously have, harvest. We take high moisture corn and then 2 crops of silages. So we have 3 harvests per year. But other than that, the majority of our ebb and flow is just the amount of cattle we have on feed. But we do have we receive and we ship cattle every week. So we do have cattle coming in and going out all the time.
Sure. One of the things that I was thinking about, I know your family has been in the cattle feeding business for a long, long time, and you yourself grew up in it. So I know you understand that. As I've had interviews with different folks throughout on the Working Ranch Radio show, one of the things that has been evident is the fact that we have seen a change in cattle. That over the course of, your family goes back to the 70s, and from that time until now, there has been a change in cattle. How does that relate from the feed yard business, the change of cattle that's coming out of the commercial cow-calf ranches into the feedlot? What does those changes look like from the feed yard side of things?
Absolutely. What we're able to do with genetics now is just crazy. So both, the breed and the genetics, I guess the marbling and the carcass characteristics of animals has just really improved. The vast change, I would say, or the biggest change on the feed yard side is the outweight of cattle. In Grandpa's day, a fat animal, was, 1,000 to 1,100 pounds. And now we have some cattle that come in at that weight. Not that that's recommended, but we can make cattle so much bigger and provide so much more meat on each, from each animal than we used to be able to. Mm-hmm.
Trista, what about the efficiency in these cattle? I know from what cattle used to be to what they are now, there's a lot of expectations that these breeds are putting in these cattle and how they're supposed to perform when they hit the feedlot.
Yeah, that would probably be the second largest change in my opinion. Besides the outweight is the efficiency of the cattle. They can gain so much more efficiently on less feed. So that has been not necessarily that we're feeding less, but they're more efficient with the conversion. So they are able to, I guess, make those pounds in the same amount of time that we used to make them, but we can make so many more.
Mm-hmm. Trista, from the perspective of a rancher in regards to where you fit in this beef supply chain, and I'm going to talk about pretty much the chain from the rancher to the packer. The ranchers producing the calves, they go to grass, they go to a feed yard, eventually through the feed yard into the packer, which by all accounts in those three steps puts you in the middle. Do you feel as though you're kind of the middleman in this situation?
Yes, I would. With the vast majority of our cattle being customer cattle, our obligation and our duty is to our customer to ensure that their cattle are performing to the best of their abilities. We do have a relationship with a packer, so the majority of our cattle would go to that packer on a grid. But I do feel that grid does the best job to get our customers the best return that they can. But on the other hand, I guess speaking to the middleman piece, the packers are a partner with us as well. So we are trying to make sure that everyone is as happy as possible. If we do something that the packer doesn't like and they nullify our grid, then, we're not doing our duty to get our customers the best return that they can. So we are trying to be the best partner with both sides as we can be.
Yeah.
And it is a challenging tightrope.
Yeah, it is, and I think as you well know, I mean the ranching industry has a lot of frustrations currently with the packing industry, and sometimes that goes and tied with where the prices are at currently, and so from that perspective, do you have to deal with much of that frustration from the rancher side, or being the middle, are you able to keep things out of some of the political elements in your dealings?
No, I would say that's definitely high on everyone's mind right now. Is just trying to figure out how to maybe tip the scales a little bit more in the cattleman's favor, or the rancher's favor in this case. The challenging part there is the cyclical nature of the beef industry. We see it kind of on a smaller scale on the herd size. There's more cattle, so the price goes down. It's simple economics. If there's fewer cattle, then the price goes up. And I think that's kind of where we're at in the cycle of the beef industry right now, is that there are too many cattle and not enough hooks, and that gives the packer more leverage over all of us. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how to find that equilibrium, because I'm sure, in the next 5 to 10 years, that'll go the other way. I hope it will, where we get our chance to make the money and we tell the packer what the price is. Mm-hmm. But farmers, we're not very good at finding that equilibrium and just staying there.
Mm-hmm. Trista Brown Priest is my guest today, Chief Operations Officer for Cattle Empire. We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, what are the issues that the feed yard businesses are paying attention to in regards to what's happening back in Washington, D.C.? We're going to talk about that and more when we continue on the Working Ranch Radio Show. For commercial cow-calf producers, crossbreeding with Gelbvieh Balancer is the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Gelbvieh Balancer females offer maternal superiority through increased fertility, greater longevity, and more pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer cattle can offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Gelbvieh Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelbvieh.org. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I'm your host, Justin Mills. Our featured interview today brought to you by Biozyme. Protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. And before we jump into our more of our conversation with our guest today, I want to remind you that if you hear something on the show and you want to go back and hear it again, one of the easiest ways that you can do that is if you're familiar with podcasts or any of the podcast sites that are out there, if you search on that under Working Ranch Radio Show, you will find us. And not only can you listen to the program that you're wanting to listen to again, but also any previous programs as well. And there's also easy ways for you to share that through social media or email links as well. So easy way for you to go back and listen to those programs is through our podcast site. Well, we continue our conversation today as we're focused on looking at the feed yard business, and my guest is Trista Brown Priest. She is the Chief Operations Officer for Cattle Empire, and as she talked about in the first segment there, Cattle Empire, a family-owned operation out of Satanta, Kansas, grew to be the fifth largest feedlot in the United States before their strategic restructure in 2018. At that time, before that, they had a capacity of 245,000 head. Now in their restructure, down to about a 53,000 head capacity. But Trista, as we go into the next segment here, for all of us in any business we're in, there's always things happening back in Washington, D.C. that affect our business. And so from the feed yard business, what are you guys watching? And the issues that are taking place back in Washington and legislative things that are coming down the pike or you hear about, what are some of those things that you are paying attention to that you think would affect the business of the feed yard operations?
Yes, I think the biggest thing that we're watching out of DC is the issue on cash trade on the fat cattle side, and how much of that should be open market, actual cash trade, and how much of it should be based on grids. I don't have a good solution for that, but I do know that we don't want the government involved. I'm from the government. I'm here to help, and that is not what we want. We need to be able to regulate ourselves and figure out this problem on our own as an industry. And I feel that some of this division amongst the beef industry is not helping us. We're all here to hopefully all make it for another day, and we need to figure out our problems amongst ourselves. And all this fighting is just confusing everyone that's not at the table with us. Mm-hmm. So we need to sit down and figure out what's a workable solution for all parties, and how do we get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Trista, you talked about some of the things that you're watching in D.C. Are there other concerns facing the feed yard business, and not just not just maybe your family operation, but just the feed yard business in general, that just, I guess everybody's business has some things that kind of nag in the back of your head. For the feed yard business, what does that look like?
Absolutely. I would say the most immediate concern or one of the more short-term problems potentially is the corn market. Our grain is just crazy expensive up here with our basis and everything, and that makes it, we need to make sure we're being as efficient with every kernel of grain as we can be, so that our customers don't have that ridiculously high cost of gain. But again, hopefully that's a relatively short-term issue. Mm-hmm. Long-term, I would say the biggest issues in our area, we're on an aquifer here. We get very little rain. It's the perfect climate for feed yards because we only get 14 to 16 inches of rain a year. We don't have any mud issues with cattle, but we only get 14 inches of rain. So the vast majority of the crops here are irrigated crops using groundwater. The state estimates that our water will only last for 20 to 25 more years. As a third generation farm, we were hoping to be here for longer than that. So we're very invested in monitoring our aquifer and our water use and making sure we're conserving that for as long as possible. So big picture, long term, that's one of our biggest hot buttons. The second is labor. We're very lucky in that we have all of our positions filled at the moment, but that's not always the case. We are in very small communities here. Satanta is about 1,200 people. So you can burn through your potential labor pool pretty quickly, and we've really struggled trying to find employees in the past, and I'm sure we will again in the future.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about a couple things, and one of the hot button issues right now that all of agriculture is having to face is environmental concerns. And how does that affect your business? I know the animal feeding segment of the industry has been targeted quite a bit in the past as well. And so when we talk about some of the environmental concerns and talking sustainability in agriculture, what does that look like from the feed yard business and how you address that?
So one unique thing about Cattle Empire is that we have a water reclamation system. So like I said, all of our water for the cattle and for the feed yard comes from our groundwater sources. In the winter, when we turn on the overflows on all of our water tanks, we have a water reclaim system plumbed into those overflows. So we catch the drips of the overflows and filter it through a couple series of filters, and then run it through some UV lights, and then we run that water back into our cattle tanks. So it's not something that goes into the mill for feed processing or for humans to drink, but it goes back to the cattle, and the water that comes out of our water reclaim system is actually cleaner than the water that's already in the water tanks, just by the time it's exposed to noses and air and birds. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the water is very clean when it comes out of the water reclaim system, and we're able to recycle 20% of our annual water usage by using that water reclaim system. Mm-hmm. So that's one of our big sustainability initiatives here at Cattle Empire. And then from a manure management side, is kind of the other big deal that feed yards worry about. We collect every drop of water, whether that be rain or snow or urine, any drop of water that falls within the fences of the feed yard has to be collected. So we collect those in lagoons, and then we use that water on some nearby circles of crops. And actually, my husband farms that ground, and we feel like that works really well because he's also invested in making sure that ground is productive for the next eternity. So we do quarterly soil samples of all that ground to make sure that the nutrients are right and we're not getting anything too hot or putting too much lagoon water on it. And then for the solid manure, we export that to our farmers that bring in high moisture corn or silage. They can take manure from here for free and then put it on their fields. Mm-hmm. So I guess those are the two big feed yard sustainability things are manure and water.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to address something about the type of cattle that you guys are feeding there in your yard, and address what we are starting to see for changes in the industry with program type cattle. And you said there was some different program cattle that you feed as well as conventional style, and talk about how that has changed since you have been in the feed yard business for quite a few years. How have you seen that change in the type of program cattle that are coming through, and then passing that on, and I guess the need that you're seeing from the packer side of things?
Yeah, our feeding of program cattle is fairly new. That's something that we implemented after the downsizing. So in 2018, late 2018 and 2019, I feel like that's something that is easier to do at a smaller scale. I know 50,000 head sometimes, it depends on what side of the fence you're on, if that's small or big, but it's easier to do at this size of facility than what we were before. And the vast majority of the customers that we have utilizing one of those programs are people that have a branded beef program. So they are going to use these animals direct to consumer. So we have very few customers that are feeding program cattle that just send them to the packer. Mm-hmm.
So as you've started down this road relatively new, is that something that you're seeing that demand for increasing, or is it just because of your size where you can really handle this better for these customers?
Part of both. We can really handle it better for our customers because Roy and I are still on site every day, and we have a great leadership team at the feed yard. I would put us up against anybody. So I'm not saying that Roy and I do this by ourselves by any means, but the ownership is on site every day. That's one thing that makes us unique to Cattle Empire. Roy's house is 2 miles away, mine is 3 miles away, so we can be at the yard in a second. So we're hands on in making sure that we drive the yards every day. We see every cattle every day, every animal every day. So that's part of what made us take this leap. And then the second is, there has been quite a bit of growth. It seems like, and we don't have a branded beef program, so I'm speaking out of my depth a little bit, but those customers of ours that feed those cattle for a branded beef program seem to be doing very well. It seems like there's a lot of increasing demand from beef eaters that they want to be able to buy beef direct. And so that seems to be working very well for them.
So you talked a little bit about a lot of your staff is BQA, or all your staff is BQA certified, and that's something that, interestingly, that at some point I want to do a show on BQA. I know a lot of folks are familiar with it, but at the same time, if you had an opportunity to say, here's what I need from you, ranchers. This is what we're looking for. When these cattle arrive here in the feed yard, this is what we could advise you to do. What would that be?
If we could advise ranchers on how to most successfully send their cattle to the feed yard, I guess my number one advice is just to be transparent about what kind of treatments, what kind of vaccines, what kind of program have these cattle been through. I talked a little bit about our team and that I'm very confident in our abilities, but we can only handle what we know we're in for. If there's cattle that people say came from grass and have been backgrounded for 90 days and that they should be straightened out, but they're actually from the sale barn, that's when we have a problem. And, we try to identify those types of issues as quickly as possible and try to do the best thing we can for those animals. But, cattle can fall apart very quickly. So really just transparency in knowing where these cattle have been, what kind of things have they already gotten, and how can we pass this torch in a more efficient way that's best for the animals.
Mm-hmm. For guys that have cattle sitting on the ground and ready to go at some point, and I know you talked about the fact that, you're going to get cattle from a very varying backgrounds that come in, and the transparency may not always be there, so you're going to have to recover when those cattle get there. But at the same time, when somebody's sitting there and they're making a decision to, and I realize you're not necessarily buying these cattle, you're dealing with somebody that has bought these cattle. But at the same time, I'm a rancher sitting out here in Northeast Wyoming saying, okay, what's the perfect solution that I can provide to you, the feed yard business? And I know you just talked about the transparency part about that, but physically, what are some of the elements and the things that I can do as a rancher or as a yearling operator to set these cattle up to fit right into your yard?
That's an interesting question, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit and then hopefully lead into that. Mm-hmm. So of our customer group, we have a lot of there's a wide array. There are some customers that are retained ownership. They're cow-calf people that want to feed these cattle out to the end. And then all the way to, we have some professional cattle feeders where they've done this forever. They background them themselves. Like they go to the sale barn, they background, and then they send them. Mm-hmm. And then we have some customers that are more investment type customers, and they want us to source animals for them and then resell it to them. So I think there's a wide variety of ways that feed yards and ranchers work together. And so some people, especially some of your listeners that may, they have a tight vaccine program and their cattle are bulletproof. Those cattle might be the best suited for one of our investor type customers where you could call a feed yard and say, hey, I've got these cattle. Is anyone do you have any customers willing to buy them at this price? Mm-hmm. That's something that we may be able to do together. There are more options potentially than how you guys are marketing your cattle right now. But I think, again, that kind of goes back to there are some of our customers like that are savvy enough to know, well, a round of shots is not just a blackleg vaccine or, whatever. So they want to know specifically what have these animals gotten.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about the feed yard business today, getting a perspective from Trista Brown Priest, who's the Chief Operations Officer for Cattle Empire out of Satanta, Kansas. We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to visit with Trista about why she's optimistic about the cattle business, and also we're going to go back and visit with her more about succession planning that affected her family's operation and why she feels that's an important issue that we need to be facing in the agricultural industry. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Animal health is key to your business. So how do you track cattle health treatments? Well, stop relying on pen and paper or complicated programs. Performance Beef helps you record processing data, enter costs, and track animal health history all in real time at the chute. The mobile app also makes it easy to log pasture and pen treatments on the go. Your health data is integrated with feed and financial information in one easy-to-use platform, accessible from your computer, smartphone, or tablet. Find Performance Beef online to request a demo. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills. Our topic today is on the feed yard business, and we've been talking with Trista Brown Priest, who's the Chief Operations Officer for Cattle Empire out of Satanta, Kansas, a 53,000 head plus capacity at their feed yard operation. And Trista, as you look ahead in your business, and I know you've had a lot of changes in the last several years within your own family's operation, but as you look ahead in the feed yard business, what are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about where we're at as an industry as a whole. I feel like the problems we're going through right now and the communication issues and the fighting that we're having, I feel like that's all resolvable. And overall, beef demand is up. People are eating more beef. I feel like as a group, if we can get our house in order here, we're in a really good place to sell a lot of beef to a lot of people and have them have a really good eating experience. For a while there, and as a millennial, I suppose there were a lot of people that didn't know how to cook beef. COVID solved that problem for us. Everyone knows how to cook at home now. We just need to get that beef into their shopping cart. So overall, I guess I'm very optimistic for our whole industry.
Well, Trista, before we go, I mentioned that we would come back to this subject, and that was the subject of succession planning, because you mentioned in your family's history and talking about Cattle Empire and where it started from to where it is today, succession planning was something that deeply affected your family's operation. And so I want to go back to that because it is a big issue in the ag industry. And in fact, back on episode 28 of our program here on the 24th of June is when that show kicked out. I did an interview and a show with Alan Crockett about succession planning because it is kind of the elephant in the room, so to speak, that we used as a phrase there that we know about, we don't always want to talk about. And so as we leave here today, what would be some final words that you would offer to folks about succession planning and why that is important for these these ranching businesses?
Yeah, and I really hope that's a take home for most of the people that we talk to about this. We're trying to be really upfront. We thought we had all our ducks in a row and that everything was going to be fine, and the torch, when my grandparents passed, and the torch would pass seamlessly, but that didn't end up being the case. And I hope that's what a lot of our fellow producers get from our story, is that even if you feel like you have things figured out, talk about it again. Make sure that you guys are all on the same page, because sometimes after loved ones are gone, the game changes, and you can't always be prepared for that, but you can try. So just make sure that you're talking about it more, and everybody's very upfront about where they're at once the patriarch is gone. Mm-hmm.
Well, Trista, I want to thank you for being our guest and joining us today here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Trista Brown Priest, my guest today, Chief Operations Officer for Cattle Empire. By the way, if you'd like to find out more information about them, you can go to their website. It's cattle-empire.net. Again, that website is cattle-empire.net. And there you can read about their cattle feeding operation, Cattle Empire, located in Satanta, Kansas. Our featured interview today, again, brought to you by Biozyme. Protect and recovery with VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Well, stay with us. Meteorologist Don Day joins us next with a look at our long-term weather on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Ranching has been in the Hargrove family for generations, and they know the value of keeping a ranch in the family. Hargrove Ranch Insurance provides pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers across the nation. PRF Insurance is a USDA subsidized program that allows ranchers to insure against the risk of below-average rainfall. Hargrove Ranch Insurance utilizes industry-leading custom software to provide the rancher with information they need to stay up to date and educated on their policy throughout the year. Hargrove Ranch Insurance supports ranchers for this generation, the next, and those yet to come. Contact Hargrove Ranch Insurance at 325-573-8975 for a free custom quote, or online at hargroveinsurance.com. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills. Our weather segment today brought to you by Hargrove Ranch Insurance, providing pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers across the nation. Contact Hargrove Ranch Insurance at 325-573-8975 for a free custom quote, or find them online at hargroveinsurance.com. Well, we're joined now by meteorologist Don Day. And Don, thanks for joining us today. We are seeing some remnants of hurricane weather coming up through parts of the country, but we're going to see a reprieve here for a while of any future hurricanes here in the near term.
Yeah, what is really important about the hurricane activity that affects both the Gulf Coast and the East Coast of the United States is you wouldn't think this would be the case, but the weather in the central and western United States is a big driver, because what will happen is if you get low pressure in the western United States, that forms a pattern that makes it easier for hurricanes to form in the Gulf and the southeast coast. But when things reverse, when you see low pressure and stronger storms go into the nation's midsection and east coast, that tends to direct the storms that form and keep them out to sea. And we'll see that in the next week or two, where there is going to be another hurricane forming in the Atlantic, but it's going to go nowhere. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a break, thankfully, for those parts of the United States to get a break from the hurricane and tropical activity as the weather pattern here to start September shifts around a little bit.
And when you talk about that shift happening, you are anticipating a pretty significant weather change towards the middle of September.
It certainly is looking that way, and that's to be expected. We're getting those longer nights up in those higher latitudes and shorter days. Colder weather is building up into those areas, and that starts to make the jet stream stronger and more active. Now, what we're hoping is that beginning next week and the following 2 weeks after that, that we're going to see the frequency of frontal systems get further south along the Pacific Northwest coast and hopefully hit those really dry areas and those wildfire areas of Oregon, Washington, as well as central and northern California. I think initially there's going to be some light precipitation and some cooler weather in central and northern California and Oregon towards the middle to the end of next week. And then the following weeks after that, we're probably going to see low pressure reforming in the western states, allowing the door to some cooler weather, better chances of precipitation, including the Pacific Northwest and the northern Rockies into the northern plain states. And with that reversal, that's going to open the door up to tropical activity for the second half of September into the Gulf Coast and eastern areas of the United States again.
I know when you talk about a change in weather and compared to what we've had and the time of year that we're getting at is for the northern Rockies and maybe into the northern tier of the U.S., how cold are we talking, though?
Well, right now, there's nothing that I would say is record-breaking or off the charts cold. But rather the first couple of salvos of that cooler air masses you can get out of Canada that really change the seasons, that gets you out of summer and into an early fall pattern. One thing that we'll definitely be needing to keep an eye on is this mid-September shot of cooler weather. While it doesn't look like it'll be anything too strong, it could set the stage for a stronger push probably 2 or 3 weeks later, and that would take us into the beginnings of October.
You bet. Well, Don, thanks again for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having me.
Meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather on our program today. By the way, his website can be found at dayweather.com. I'd like to thank my other guests for joining us as well today. Trista Brown Priest, our featured interview today with Cattle Empire. Also a thank you to Mark Anderson, Executive Director to the North American Limousine Foundation, and of course the Captain, Tim O'Byrne. A thank you to our sponsors, the American Simmental Association. It's more per head, period. Find out more at simmental.org. Biozyme. Keep them on your program with ours. Gain Smart by Biozyme. Gelve Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelve.org. And Hargrove Insurance, providing pasture, range, and forage insurance to ranchers across the nation. Call for a free custom quote at 325-573-8975. Well, if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do it by calling or texting me at the studio here at 307-363-COWS, or shoot me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine. You can join us right here every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern on Rural Radio Channel 147 Sirius XM or on your podcast provider. Thanks again for joining us. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.